Um, Good morning and welcome to the January 25 meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I'd like to call the meeting to order and give a brief overview of the public comment process. We will take written questions throughout the meetings, questions and comments, of course. Please follow the instructions on your screen and on the meeting notice. I will now take a roll call of the members to establish a quorum. Virginia? Virginia, we cannot hear you. I don't know what happened to her.
Oh, are you asking for me? Virginia?
Yes,
I have
we're
no
doing the
new,
roll call. Virginia?
I
just-
have no new declarations. Sorry.
Okay, all right. Tanya?
Tanya Heikkila, no new declarations.
So Diane McKnight won't be here until 10, so we'll do it then. Anna?
Anna McCulloch, no new declarations, but I will need to step out at 10 for 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'll be back.
All right, yes, thank you. Bob?
Bob Nyman, no new declarations.
Obi?
Yeah, I had Jat Obesekara. I had three things maybe I should mention. One is the Structural Engineering Institute of the American Society of Civil Engineers has contracted with National Institute of Standard and Technology on NIST to develop 4 workshops on climate science for use in codes and standards for building and infrastructure systems. And they asked me to be the project director for this effort. It's 4 workshops that I have to help organize. So I agreed to that, and that will happen this year. The second is I gave a talk at the invitation of DWR on what is known as modernizing the probable maximum precipitation. And to summarize the National Academy report on this topic, and I was a member of that. So I gave that webinar maybe a week and a half ago. Then finally, I participated in a workshop organized by National Alliance for Water Innovation, or NAVI. It's a regional systems workshop, and it was held at Berkeley Lab, I think funded by DOE. So I was there last week for a couple of days.
All right, thank you very much, Obi. I am not sure, I don't see Kenny Rose.
He's
yet.
here.
He's here? Kenny? Why do I not see that?
I see him.
I see him now.
Yes. I have, what are we doing? Disclosures?
Yes.
Yes, roll call.
I have no, what's the phrase? I have no disclosures since.
New declarations, thank
No
you.
new declarations, thank you. I just got off another meeting.
It's a new year, right? So we all have to get back into things. Lisa?
Hi, Lisa Wanger. I have a minor declaration. I've been asked to speak at the Delta Science Programs Workshop in February on the Delta Science Plan. And the plan is currently organized around these grand challenges. We've heard about these in the meetings. And I've been asked to speak on grand challenge number 2, environmental change is outpacing the traditional pace of science. So very much in keeping with themes we discuss. And as I understand it, the workshop is aimed at gathering broad community input on the science plan and advancing a dialogue about research priorities. So I'll be participating.
All right, thank you. And I am Inge Werner, and I have no new declarations. All right, I'll give a brief overview of the agenda. Today, we will discuss the recently released draft Delta Adapts Adaptation Plan and take potential action on the next step. We will discuss ideas for Delta ISB recruitments. We'll get to that. And we will have a presentation by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on the recent response to the golden mussel invasion. Welcome, Thomas Jabusch. Are there any public comments at this point, Edmund?
There are none.
None. All right, thank you. Then we'll go to agenda item 2. I'll give a brief report and business matters. Since the last meeting, the Delta ISB finalized its review of the Delta Stewardship Council public review draft of its tribal and environmental justice issues report. That's a mouthful, so we will just call it issue paper. A copy is part of your meeting package. Overall, the issue paper offers comprehensive coverage of a wide range of tribal and environmental justice issues currently affecting the Delta. The Delta ISB noted that the primary goal of the report was somewhat unclear, and a second overarching concern was that in combining tribal justice and environmental justice issues into the same report, the reader could confound tribes with environmental justice communities, also called disadvantaged communities, rather than recognizing the diverse cultures and traditions present within the Delta. That's all I'm going to say about it at this point. Thank you very much for the leads on this, Lisa and Tanya. So I just want to briefly report on the other efforts that are ongoing. We're not going to cover them in detail. I'll just give you a brief update. So the subsidence review, where Tom Holzer is the lead, review leads are still working to get a public review draft out on that one. Then the decision-making under deep uncertainty review, the review leads are working with staff to prepare a journal article on the scenario inventory and analysis. And on the contaminants monitoring review, we have made a bit of progress. We have finalized the draft perspective, which staff is taking a look at, and we're planning on releasing the public draft prior to the February meeting, which is on February 24th. The monitoring enterprise review manuscript, the ISB leads and staff are working to turn the Delta ISB's monitoring review into a manuscript to submit to a peer-reviewed journal. So that's still ongoing. We have, since the last meeting, we received 2 public correspondences from Bob Wright, a comment letter on the draft Sacramento Delta Bay Delta Plan updates. Sorry, lots of Bay Delta in there. And one from California Water Research, who suggests speakers for the Climate Science Symposium. So I hope they got to where they need to be. Are there any questions or comments? Are there any public comments at this point? Edmund?
There are none.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to get a presentation first from Thomas Jabusch on the response to the discovery of golden mussels in the Delta. So a bit of background on that. We learned during the November Delta Lead Scientist report that the golden mussel has arrived in the Delta. It's an invasive, non-native freshwater / brackish bivalve was recently discovered in the Delta. It's the first known occurrence of golden mussels in North America, and Thomas will give us an update on the response to the invasion. So I would like to hand over to Thomas. Is that happening?
Yeah, morning everybody.
Morning.
And thanks for inviting me. I'm gonna share my slides. Okay. Can everybody see my slides well? Hear me okay?
No, we don't. Oh,
We don't see the slides yet.
You don't see the slides yet. Ah, okay. Give me a second, please. Okay. I apologize because I typically use Teams, so a little rusty on
Coming through,
now we can
not
see your
full screen
screen.
yet.
Yes.
Can
I
make
can
it
see it?
full screen. Yeah,
Okay, great.
but can you make it full screen? Okay,
Yes,
that's
of
good.
course. So, okay, here we are. And you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's not
but
full screen
yeah,
yet.
Thomas, I think you have the presentation mode. Maybe you can swap the display. Maybe the second item on the top somewhere. Yeah. Okay, swap. Let's try that one. Okay, there you go.
Okay, great. Woohoo. So, okay, so first a little bit about me. So I'm a senior environmental scientist supervisor in CDFW's invasive species program. And my main bread and butter so far have been quagga and zebra mussels, so dreaded mussels. So we got, that was already pretty full workload. So we're coordinating within CDFW. I'm at headquarters across agencies about matters related to quagga and zebra mussels. We do early detection monitoring, collaborating across the state for these dreaded mussels. We got a lab out in Bodega Bay. I also got a lab staff in Santa Cruz for quagga and zebra mussel identification and PCR confirmation. We also coordinate with Western states and nationally. And CDFW has 6 regions across 6 inland regions across the state, plus 1 marine. And we coordinate with each region has 1 environmental scientist dedicated to quagga and zebra mussels. And they're supporting water managers, prevention, containment efforts, monitoring. We also work with law enforcement. So this as a background. So far, our focus has been on quagga and zebra mussels. Enter the golden mussel. And I want to start with a little bit of background. Someone in the dreaded community, when they arrived, coined that frame. So these are dreaded on steroids. I think it was Renata Cloudy, who's been doing a lot of vulnerability assessments in the State Water Project, for example, and also research on dreadeds. As Inge mentioned, this is the first North American detection of these mussels, and it's not just the Delta issue, obviously. This has statewide, national, and international applications. Introduction was likely via international shipping, ballast water in the port of Stockton. And impacts on biology of golden mussel is similar to quagga and zebra mussels. They're good at biofouling. They're ecosystem engineers. They got impacts on water quality. There's on steroids. So the pictures you see, those are fishing nets from an aquaculture facility in South America, where they are a big problem as an invasive species. So fishing nets covered with these mussels in an aquaculture facility. So in a nutshell, golden mussels have a wider tolerance for environmental variables in general, but most importantly, calcium, temperature, salinity. They can spawn continuously in suitable conditions. Some and they're known for rapid growth and dense colonization. Get a little bit more into the details of that. So for example, calcium, they're capable of reproducing at calcium concentrations of about 5 milligrams per liter, compared to quagga and zebra mussels, which we start worrying about when calcium reaches levels of more than 15 milligrams per liter. They tolerate higher salinity than quagga and zebra mussels, so they can make do in brackish conditions. And for example, in the estuary, we weren't too concerned about quagga and zebra mussels in the upper reaches of Suisun Bay, for example, but there might be a possibility that the mussels could establish there as well. Temperature range is fairly high, and then also wider pH range than Dracaenids. Worth noting is that they don't seem to like fast-moving water much. Neither do quagga zebra mussels, but they like it even less. So in the delta, we find them mostly in backwaters. And they occur to depths up to 130 feet, or 40 meters. Been observed not quite as deep as quagga and zebra mussels, but quite deep. That all said, we have a quite extensive database of calcium and other water quality parameters in our program, and did an initial assessment. There might be some errors in this map, so don't get hung up on any specific point here, but the bottom line is all these red dots are areas that might be suitable places where we have calcium data from potentially for golden mussel establishment. And so far with the Dracaenids, we haven't even worried so much about areas that receive mostly Sacramento River water, but for quagga and zebra mussels, yeah, the North Delta seems to be game. At least from calcium, based on calcium. A little bit about the biology. So golden mussels, they're their own genus. They're not closely related to zebra mussels. They're mitilids, but they share a lot of biological traits, as I mentioned, like QC mussels. So I'm gonna start calling them like that now. They reproduce by releasing eggs and sperm into the water. Eggs develop in the velagers that are microscopic and found in the water column after developing for a few weeks. The velagers settle out onto surfaces. They're hard to see, but feel like sandpaper. They prefer hard surfaces, dark places and corners, but prefer to settle near the surface of the water. So the undersides of docks are in ideal locations, and that's where our staff in the field tended to find them in quite a few instances. They grow into adult mussels, which reach a maximum of 1 to 2 inches in length. The mussels may start reproducing as early as 3 months, and they reproduce prolifically. So a glass of water from an infested water body can have thousands of velagers. In suitable conditions, they can spawn year-round. This means their population can grow very rapidly once established. They're filter feeders that consume large amounts of algae, which obviously can reduce food sources for other species, including fish. So big ecosystem food chain disruptor potentially. Impacts, since they're growing so rapid and feeding so rapidly, they can have major impacts. They can form dense colonies up to 23,000 mussels per square foot. And by the way, this log on the bottom of the screen, that's one we collected from the Port of Stockton, just around the corner, actually, under the I-5 bridge in that dead end towards downtown. They can clog intakes, irrigation lines, power generation infrastructure, cooling intakes on boat motors, any infrastructure that uses untreated water from an infested water body may have mussels colonize it, and it can be time-consuming and expensive to regularly remove mussels from equipment. And based on our literature review, like quagga zebras, they've been linked to increased frequencies of HABs, harmful algal blooms, by the way of filtering out smaller algae and leaving the colonies of microcystis behind. So lots of concern. A little bit about the invasion history. That's also, I think, good background. So originally, these mussels are from China, Southeast Asia, and they've first invaded other areas in Asia, including Hong Kong and some major cities in Japan, and they were then introduced to Argentina in 1991, most likely again in ballast water from a commercial ship. Spread rapidly once introduced and are found in 5 South American countries. Main vector for spread was recreational boats, apparently also in South America, but there's other ways they're spreading. They're spreading at a very fast rate in some instances. For example, they were able to spread upstream in rivers where they were introduced and spread up to 150 miles a year on average in some of those big river systems. Mostly based on recreational boatings, heavy recreational boating. Some other mechanisms were mussels being carried upstream by transporting sand for beaches, for replenishing beaches upstream, then in those strange ways. So they do get eaten by some species, sometimes because of the dearth of other food supplies. So some fisheries were more productive actually after they came, but also to the detriment of some other species that were eating them. So one way of transporting upstream apparently is fish consuming these mussels. They swim upstream, they die. They are not that digestible, the mussels. The mussels survive and then they colonize further upstream. Just want to mention. Yeah, so again, discovered near the port of Stockton, October 17th, and first record of golden mussels in North America. I want to show you what we've been seeing so far. I think we have a pretty good handle on the HFD population to date. The timeline, that's not a timeline, that's a timeline on where we found them in key places as we expanded our radius in the Delta and Suisun Bay and other places. So first port of Stockton, October 17th, same time. The sample collected same time, had mussels from the Middle River. A little later, they were reported also from O'Neill South Bay, further, O'Neill Fore Bay, further in the south here near San Luis Reservoir in the bottom of this map. And then also shortly after in the California Aqueduct. And more recently, just around New Year's Eve, we got a report that they were in Bethany Reservoir, which is the first stop of the aqueduct after leaving the pumps. So those are the detections to date. I want to talk a little bit about our monitoring. So we have standardized protocols for looking for these mussels, surface surveys. We place artificial substrates. We haven't done any plankton tows yet, and disclaimer, these veligers that you see in this microscopic photo are not golden mussel. These are quagga zebra, but as a reality, so we got, as part of our efforts, species identification verification group that looks into these issues, and they look darn, golden mussel veligers look darn close to quagga zebra, not discernible. Anyway, so on the right, that's all the monitoring that we've been doing specifically for golden mussel since this initial discovery. So many sources of the state, we've been monitoring priority water bodies that we are most concerned about. And that cluster again in the middle that recognize it, that's the red dots, that's the detections in the delta. All the blue dots is where we've been and mussels were absent. So it seems that's where the populations is at this moment. So now they're in our water conveyance system, so that's a big concern. And you're probably all very familiar with these maps, and that the Central Valley Project, the federal project, and the state project are very interlinked. So of course the concern is, you know, the spread through these water conveyances. And then of course, recreational boating. What you see here is a map that we got from Colorado, the watercraft inspection database. So this is just from participating agencies. California as a state is not participating in the system, but some of our water agencies do. And then that's reports we got from boats in 2024 that came out of the Delta as the last visited water. So that's a big concern that right now all these boats, or that these boats already have been traveling all over the place with no restrictions. So yeah, that's a big concern. The spread with recreational watercraft. And I want to mention, so one thing I didn't mention on the monitoring slide, the Golden Mussel Task Force is also looking into, and CDFW looking into applying eDNA as a tool. And one of the things the WR did is they were looking at older samples they had. They were just recently looking at a sample from, I think, spring 2023. And the mussels were already in that sample. That was a sample from the California aqueduct. Containment challenges. The Delta, as you know, vast and interconnected. So containment in the Delta is going to be challenging. The water conveyances are already in there. All the unmanaged water accesses that exist in the data where people take boats in and out. And then, of course, you know, our limited personnel and funding. Actions in progress. So many of the actions are folded into this umbrella of the multi-agency task force, Golden Mussel Task Force, which is in the process of developing a response plan that is going to have 10 elements, including monitoring, communications, containment, education and outreach, funding, laws, regulations, and policy, partners, prevention at uninfested water bodies, minimizing impacts, and the science advisory panel. It's a science advisory panel. There's a plan to form one. What I also didn't mention, one of the first things that happened is that emergency regulations came into reality in December. So that went pretty fast. It was on fast track. They're now being made permanent to add the golden mussel to the restricted species in California. And the feds are also working on adding them to the LACES Act. I want to mention something else. I was talking about eDNA. There's a researcher at Santa Cruz, UC Santa Cruz, Rachel Meyer. She's been sharing eDNA results from archived samples from 2020. What you see is a map of Long Beach, Port of Long Beach. And the green dots are eDNA hits that she shared with members of the IAP, and then shared them with us of golden mussel around the Port of Long Beach. And my team did due diligence. I actually got some staff in Seal Beach just around the corner. And when looking for golden mussels, and they did find mussels in a water body called the Dominguez Channel, where the arrow is. The two yellow dots is where the mussels were found. They looked darn close to golden mussels, but the salinity, that's, if you see the graph, you can read it, Alameda, and the Alameda side, that's the salinity that was measured there. That's data from the water board. Seems a bit high for golden mussel to establish. So we did we insisted on genetic analysis, and this picture here shows what we actually found was yet another invasive species that I want to bring to your attention because it's a brackish water species called Senistrobus occurrence. As you can see from the photos, just based on morphology, really hard to discern from golden mussel. We alerted our marine region. We're going to do some follow-up monitoring just to see if that's already an established population. But yeah, so that's a new discovery in SoCal, and since it's a brackish water species, probably something to put on the radar for our estuary up here as well. So that's what I have for now. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this overview. We have plenty of time for questions, so I'd like to open up the discussion, and I apologize if I don't see everybody on the screen. Just speak up if I don't see a raised hand. So please go ahead. Oh, well, I have several questions if nobody else. Oh, there they go. Kenny.
Yeah, so as you very well know, the system we're talking about is infamous for invasive species. Is there anything you could envision without, being committed to it or anything? What can you do to stop the spread once they're there? I mean, prevention is great, but it might be too late. Is there anything like what can you do? In fisheries, when we do that, we sometimes actually give cash awards to people who catch them and don't put them back, right? Which is a little brutal, but is there anything you could do for I've done a little bit of work on these mussels, and they're very well adapted to invade, as I think you've figured out yourself. So what do you wait? Can you prepare? Can you identify what systems we should look for early signals of problems? Near shore food web habitats? What do you, and I know the plan is coming, so but is there, just in general, what can be done? That's a hard question, by the way. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, and probably there's several layers to the answer. I mean, one of the main foci right now is, not getting them introduced into other systems, so preventing the introduction to other systems. So like we did a water agency summit yesterday, invited all the water agencies in California to update them on the golden mussel issue and prevention and things like that. So that's one thing, and getting the other states alerted, that boats out of California are hot and, you know, you need to worry about it. For the Delta system, it's very challenging. I mean, you got boats going all over the place and all that, and with the interconnectedness, I don't know. There's a containment effort group. I can't speak on their behalf. I'm probably speaking more my mind right now. So, I mean, one thing is we don't know the effect on the system in the Delta. Some people, I saw some comments that people are even fairly dismissive, like, oh, we got the clam already, so these mussels are just gonna have a niche. Who knows? Another thing is, if productivity is moving into the floodplains, you know, and that's a place where the mussels can't keep up and eat all the food away. If we have primary productivity and restored intermittent wetlands, right, mussels will dry up or they will not even establish. So, but containing, I don't know. Yeah, others need to.
I understand. We're
Yeah.
with almost every large system these days. It's just a little bit frustrating that we're able to detect they're there, and then we're not sure. Maybe there's nothing you can do. Maybe just prepare for what's going to happen. You know, like you said.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's already a modified system, right? And I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but I think there's a lot of interesting and important questions that come up.
Yeah. Thanks.
In terms of adaptive management.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but thanks for that.
Obi,
Yeah,
can I jump in and ask a related questions, or did you have something similar?
no, it's separate question. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, we've seen this over and over and over again in the Delta, right? Some are more salinity tolerant, others are more freshwater tolerant, and it seems very difficult to control these invasions. But somebody told me that they're actually monitoring, they actually have all the data on these ships that come in and release the ship ballast water, because that's one of the biggest problems, right? That's how they come in, and it's very difficult to control. Is there anything done to try to figure out which ship brought them? And you know, can you is there anything done to control the ship ballast water being released, treated, or you know, fines imposed, that kind of thing? Do you know?
Kind of all of the above, but this is actually not our jurisdiction. That's the State Lands Commission who's dealing with ballast water.
Oh.
You know, and not really my bailiwick, but there are, I mean, there are regulations in place, and they had a suspected vessel, but it's been inconclusive, which vessel it was. They did try to trace it, but to no avail. The system isn't perfect, ballast water system. So, but I really don't want to talk to that because it's not really my area of expertise. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Oh.
I don't. Yeah, thank you, Linda. I'm not an expert on this, but I am interested in knowing its potential impact on infrastructure. I mean, particularly, I mean, you have these major pumping stations and other infrastructure that could get clogged easily. You know, from what I hear, like Lake Michigan had this issue as well, probably different kind of species. But my question is, and it looks like from your chart, it could get out of hand very easily. I mean, look at all those states that are, I think once they establish themselves, it could spread very quickly. So my question is, and it's in Delta, in which I don't know how whether they're near the pumps or not. And I was curious how they got into St. Louis Reservoir. And my follow-up question, two questions. One is how bad it is. Is it from scale of 1 to 10? Is it when at some point would you have to declare some sort of an emergency depending on the impact? And the other question is, under future conditions, with climate change, are there any predictions of how fast it could spread?
Okay, so I think the answer to it is being treated as an emergency. So it's an emergency response, basically, what we're doing. Predictions. We're not really doing research. I wish we could, but we don't have, that's not what we're doing. And I don't have an answer to the climate questions. I think, there's a lot of research questions that are very important to address. I'm thinking about that too. It's not really what we're doing though. So looking to the science community to help us with that. And in terms of the infrastructure, one thing that's really on our mind is also making sure the agricultural community, there's outreach and that they're becoming aware of this potentially being a big issue in the Delta.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the clogging of pipes and pumps and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be really severe if mussels
Right.
get foothold and find conditions very suitable. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas.
All right. Thank you. Anna?
I think you've partially answered my question with some of the end of the conversation with Kenny, but are there any examples where there has been success in stopping the spread of an invasive species once it has gotten into some, US system, or maybe even more locally within the Delta? Or is it really more about adaptation and potentially slowing the spread? It seems like it's hard to imagine stopping or reversing this process once it starts getting going. I'm more familiar with invasive species in the Great Lakes systems than in the Delta, but I'm sure the same applies.
So I mean, from the mussel world, there's very few examples where eradication was successful. So it can be done. The examples we have, one that comes to mind is a quarry on the East Coast somewhere. So it was a fairly contained system. And they dumped potash and smothered the quagga and zebra mussels, zebra mussels. And there was another example, Midwest, slips my mind, could have been Texas, where they did a bunch of things, including tarping, surfaces and things like that. But again, those were more like very, very different, not as interconnected places as the Delta. So yeah.
Well, plus those are very drastic interventions, right? That would have consequences that go far beyond the specific species that you're trying to target.
And that too, yeah, exactly. I mean, if you nuke the Delta, can't do that, right? I mean, what I was asked about possible mechanisms. So in Brazil, they're working on a genetic method. I forgot the term, but basically they're introducing infertile mussels into the mix, and they're trying to turn the population infertile. So that's something they're working on, but I think they're just in the early stages of that.
I think this has been done for mosquitoes in some regions, if I remember correctly, for malaria control, for example.
Yeah.
So, but then, lacking that, right? And obviously that doesn't sound like something that would be relevant on the timescales that we're looking at here. Is the strategy primarily focused on adaptation? Is the strategy focused on at least slowing the spread to buy communities time? Other than noticing and tracking the spread, what are the main focus areas for action and response? It sounds like just awareness and outreach is part of it, but are there goals or metrics associated with this that are clear?
So I think everybody's been a little frustrated about the pace of this process, and it's just been challenging. It's a multi-agency task force, so you basically need people to work together, and a lot of people. It's not an incident command system where someone just says this is what's going to be done and person A is responsible for B and you're all going to be assigned to that one. But that said, things are starting to make progress. So what you just mentioned, all these things are being worked out in the response plan I mentioned. That's currently being drafted, and draft's supposed to be completed by end of this week, and then move forward to being shared with legislature and everybody else. But yeah, I think it would be not my place to comment on that, because yeah, I'm leading the monitoring team, so I'm making recommendations, but I don't really. It seems like a lot of the focus is really on prevention right now, getting water bodies that are not affected to prevention, and reducing the risk of water, and especially boats coming out of the Delta, affecting other parts of the state and the country.
I don't want to take up more time, but I'm sorry, I'll just make a comment. I was muted. It sounds like these efforts might slow the spread, but it's almost impossible to think of at some point some boat, something not getting through it. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but for my own sake, I would be interested in understanding more about what is the goal we're trying to achieve. Is it adaptation? Is it slowing the spread, or is it simply awareness so that people can respond locally as they see fit? Because just monitoring it's important, but I'm not clear what the sort of actionable information is based on that. But again, I understand that's not your specific role, and so I don't want to.
No, I'm not a decision maker.
Take away time from others. Yeah.
That way.
Okay, I'll stop here.
I want to say this. So yes, so prevention is a big goal. So as to the extent that it's possible, then in cases where it's not possible, kind of preparation for the circumstance. And also, I mean, from my perspective, hoping that there's some successful methods coming in the future. And, it's always circumstantial. There's places where you can contain, there's places where you can prevent. And I mean, our experience with quagga and zebra mussels was that, so they arrived in California in 2007, 2008. They also got spread with the conveyances in Southern California, mostly initially, California aqueduct, and there were some major changes implemented. So some places, the water got redirected, they got more Delta water instead, and things like that. But also all this other stuff got kicked in. Water agencies got on board with, having prevention programs at their water bodies, managing water access and all that, and getting the message out. So the boating fishing community came on board. So that's really important, you know, that kind of cooperation. And I mean, we got about 40 reported locations where we know we got quagga and zebra mussels. So most of them, they were infested in those early 2 years. And then that really slowed down. And also nationally, for example, boating, you know, we had hundreds, if not thousands of quarantined boats that got intercepted, boats with quagga or zebra mussels that got intercepted at our border protection stations by CDFA and quarantined. That number is down to just not even a dozen this year. So things are, you know, taking effect. Of course, like you say, you know, there's this freak boat with mussels that slips through the cracks, and there you have it. You have an infested water. Yeah, that is the sad truth. So yeah, it's kind of a weird dynamic, but you know, we're fighting this uphill battle. Yeah, trying to stay optimistic.
Thank you.
Right, Anna, did you have any other comments, questions? No? Good. All right, Lisa, you had.
Okay, I'll try not to belabor this. You know, I'm an economist who works a lot on aquatic invasive species and looking at the benefit cost of treating them. And I'd say one of the take homes from my research is that you often need a pretty substantial investment to be effective. And so and that gets justified by looking at what the cost of doing nothing. And so I'm wondering, is there someone in the team who is working on that kind of analysis to present the evidence of why it's worth making certain investments to slow the spread? I think slowing the spread until there's some sort of biocontrol or something, even with a biocontrol, you typically only slow the spread. But that slowing the spread can be really important if you can keep it out of, as Obe mentioned, you know, sensitive infrastructure. Like there's approaches where you pick the sites you want to try to stay clear, and there's approaches where you're trying to slow the species anywhere it is, right? You have site-led and species-led efforts, and so I'm sure there's someone in this team of interdisciplinary agencies who's familiar with these strategies. But the question is, you know, is there potentially a role for the board to suggest this kind of research, because half measures can be really ineffective?
Sure. So yeah, I think feedback is good. I mean, yeah, and that what you just said, you know, there's a need to assess this kind of stuff. The question is also, where do the resources come from, you know, to do all this important work that would better inform strategy and policy? We can do it, you know, we're really very implementation focused. I wish we had, you know, more capacity and resources to do actually more research or collaborate more with academics, but we don't right now. We're bluntly, we're really under-resourced, you know, just trying to keep our heads over water. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm next in line. I was curious, you mentioned in your talk that the mussel occurrence, you know, you kind of established a link, a tentative link between harmful algal blooms and the mussels. Now, I was kind of hoping that the mussels would eat the blue-green algae and therefore reduce the harmful algal blooms. But do you know anything about that, or why did you mention that co-occurrence of the mussels and the harmful algal blooms?
Apparently, there was some research being done on golden mussel. We also know that from quagga and zebra mussel in the Great Lakes, that there's these kinds of relationships. They don't really like blue-green algae that much, apparently. It's not always a clear-cut picture, but there's been some evidence that introduction of, you know, filter feeders like that has that kind of effect.
So it's just a co-occurrence, but we don't really know the mechanisms or how that could come about, right? Is what I'm deducing from what you say.
Well, I don't want to digress, but in the Great Lakes, I think some people, I mean, yeah, of course, it's always really difficult to establish cause and effect, but I think there's some interesting research in the Great Lakes and good research that has established these kinds of. We have a Great Lakes person here who can probably talk better about this, speak better to this than me, but there seems to be some evidence.
All right. Thank you. Virginia, you had a question?
So mine is more a comment. Thomas, you've done a really good job telling us about the monitoring situation and very up to date, as well as talking about some of the prevention measures. But it's clear to me that a lot of the questions that we're addressing is not in your bailiwick. So I would like to suggest that at our next meeting, we have somebody who can talk about how these mussels and maybe other invasive species are being addressed once they're in place. I think Kenny mentioned, are you just dealing with them once they're there? But I'd really like to hear a report on what is happening once they're there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can convey that and maybe get someone from leadership to talk to you.
Okay, if everyone else agrees, but
Yeah.
it would help me.
Or that other agency that you mentioned, what was it,
State Lands Commission?
Yeah, that, who are in charge of monitoring or trying to figure or controlling ballast water issues.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. That would be interesting too. Maybe a combination. Yeah. All
Yeah,
right.
I can convey that or share some suggestions for people to talk.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That would be very interesting because it seems like it's just so hard to, I mean, you mentioned that the veliger larvae are, it feels just like a rough surface and they're microscopic and it's, I mean, I really don't know how you can prevent these invasions. I mean, they're spread so easily that it's really difficult to imagine how to tackle that issue. Yeah. That would be really interesting to hear in more detail what is being done.
Yeah, but the other part is beyond prevention is what about once they're there?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, it's always it seems like you always lose. I mean, it's very encouraging to hear that you seem to get a handle on the quagga mussel and that detections are going down and all of that. So that's great behavior. But I mean, you see that everywhere. Everybody is afraid of these quagga mussels invading their water bodies, and it's usually just a matter of time. You can slow it down, but you don't seem to be able to prevent it. So, and I'm sure some inhabitants of these waters are happy, like the ducks. They have more food, or whoever can eat and digest these things. But I mean, clearly they create a lot of turmoil in an existing ecosystem. So, and of course, people don't like them because they cause work and cost by inhabiting these pipes and things. And so, yeah.
But then again, I think, that's just me, but, this whole moving primary productivity and productivity in general into floodplains, mussels won't follow. The more
They will not follow, or they will?
They won't. They'll dry up. They
Yeah.
won't be able to establish the population, right?
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that. I missed that. Okay. Obi, you had something else?
Yeah. One comment listening to this conversation. from an ISP point of view, is this going to be, is this some new game changer for some restoration planning or any other major initiatives in the future? And I would think that should be of interest to us to know, what impact it could have on future projects. I think, and this idea of maybe having a broader conversation with the management on the management side might be helpful to us, is my comment.
I don't see any other raised hands. And so I just want to thank you again, Thomas, for this really interesting talk and for teaching us about the golden mussel. And we hope that your monitoring, actually the eDNA is probably really useful, is going to go well, and you can help in reducing the spread. I want to say reducing the spread of these things. Thanks so much.
trying until we find the magic bullet. So thank you for your
Yeah.
time.
It's all right. So thanks again. And Diane McKnight joined us, so I'd like to extend the roll call to her. Diane, do you have any new declarations?
I have no new declarations, and I apologize for not being able to be here right at the beginning.
Thank you. All right, and next on our agenda is a 15-minute break, so I would suggest we do that a little early and reconvene at 10:17 or something.
Inga?
Thank you.
Oh, Inga.
Did we have public comment?
Oh, are there public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
Thank you. All right, see you again in 15 minutes. Okay. Welcome back to the Delta Independent Science Board meeting after the break. Next we will come to agenda item 4, which is a discussion of our review draft of the Delta Adaptation Plan. This effort is led by Obi. Just to give a little bit of background, the Delta Stewardship Council has published a draft adaptation plan as part of its climate initiative, Delta Adapts. The draft details strategies and actions to improve regional resilience to climate change, including adaptation costs and governance recommendations. Obi, thankfully, agreed to prepare a review letter based on our comments. And at the December meeting, we assigned chapters and agreed to the following format. We would provide major and overarching comments, then chapter comments in order of what is good, what can be improved, and how to improve deficiencies. We will now use this meeting to discuss our comments to inform the preparation of the draft review letter. If we agree on the content, we hope to delegate finalizing the review letter for submission to the council by February 18th. Our next meeting is February 24th, so we would have to delegate that. As I understand, we would get another opportunity to review the final draft of the letter before submission to the council. I'll hand over to Obi now for an overview of the comments, of which there are many, and a discussion on the comments. You have the word, Obi.
All right, thank you, Inga. Yeah, I had the privilege, I guess, of assembling all the comments and eventually writing the memo or summary report of our comments. And I welcome anybody else to join me in doing that. So like Inga mentioned, it's fairly nice. I believe it's a very nicely put together report of how to address climate change and adaptation, and then primarily the strategies how to address the vulnerabilities. The report is part of a couple of 2 phases of this project, which Delta Stewardship Council started almost 6 years ago in 2018, as I understand it. Phase 1 was the Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment, or otherwise known as CCVA, and that was completed in 2021. Phase 2 is the one that we are reviewing now, this Delta Adapt report. It has 13 chapters, 4 to 7 outlines adaptation strategies, and has some other chapters that are very useful. Chapter 8, regional roadmap, and chapter 9 on costs and benefits, chapter 10 on governance and implementation of the plan. So I think it's fairly comprehensive report of the Delta Adapt effort. Like Inga mentioned, initially we were going to review only a few chapters, but I think I'm glad we reviewed all the chapters, the ISB, and we have a lot of comments from everybody according to the format that Inga mentioned. So maybe what I could do is I could give my, assessment, a high-level assessment of the comments, and maybe we can invite other members of ISB to provide their comments. And hopefully at the end of that, we can discuss how we put together this summary memo or report as our comment. So my initial, I have 2 or 3 things I want to mention. Like I said, it's nice compilation of strategies that make sense how to address climate change, vulnerabilities that were outlined in that previous report. But I think it's sort of conceptual in nature for most part. Obviously, maybe by design there are no, a lot of details on how the strategies are selected, and more importantly, there's no description or summary of quantitative information and relative benefits of some of the strategies over the others. I think that would have been nice, but maybe that's by design. This is a compilation of very logical set of strategies to address climate change or, adaptation to it. The other comment I have is, like, I didn't see a prioritization of the strategies for each of the impacts that were discussed, primarily flood risk reduction, ecosystem, agriculture, and water supply. So there was no prioritization, and I think having some sort of a maybe quantitative information would have helped prioritize some of the strategies. The other comment I have is I would have liked to see some information how these impacts might change in the future due to non-stationarity or climate change, and how these strategies should be phased in, perhaps in a logical way, to make sure what I call, make sure this resilience is sort of sustainable at a particular level, because as the things change in time, or maybe what is resilient today might not be resilient, a decade or 2 decades from now. So that issue, I think, would have been nice to have. And the one other comment that came up also in our sort of comments from all the members is the discussion of fire effects could have been better. I think that it was mentioned a few times, but I think knowing what happened in Southern California, not necessarily that might happen here, this issue of compounding effects of multiple drivers and how bad it could get, that would have been useful as well. Those are my personal high-level comments, but I'm sure others may have other, I think at this stage, maybe some high-level comments that we should probably provide in the form of a memo. And then my suggestion might be to attach our comments separately in our response. Any questions, or do you want to go around and ask other people to comment?
Yeah, so do we have comments from the other members in terms of what they thought were their most important points? I know there are a lot of detailed comments, but maybe the overarching comments first. Lisa.
Hi. Yeah, I'm not going to try to be comprehensive. I think I have two high-level comments I want to add to Obey's. So probably because we both work on uncertainty analysis, I had some of the same concerns about, looking in too short of a time frame to set priorities, because, maybe you have sunk costs associated with something that's not going to persist. So I want to share his concern that maybe some more uncertainty analysis needs to come in. And then I would add two more things. One, this is very much putting on my economist hat, but I feel as though, not everything that they outlined as a desirable is really within their control. And some people mentioned food security, but I was much more focused on the agricultural incentives, where they had these shoulds for the farmers, but didn't seem to be really leveraging existing programs and incentives to try to achieve these goals, or, implement them in a way that's realistic. So I think another general comment is just making sure that you're really looking at the ecosystem of incentives and what policy levers are available when you're setting these goals and setting priorities. And a similar comment is, I thought the cost benefit chapter was really clear about how they came to their recommendations. They cited analyses or they cited reports. I often was left wondering in other chapters where those recommendations were coming from. They alluded to quantitative analysis, but didn't cite anything. So I think documenting how the recommendations were achieved is another overarching comment I would make. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lisa. Tanya.
Yeah, I'll just echo first what Obey and Lisa said. I agree with the points they've already made and don't want to repeat them, but I do want to emphasize them. I think that transparency and how those recommendations came about, especially that, as Lisa just mentioned, is really important. And one of the things that I commented on in the chapters that I reviewed that I know is more of a specific comment, but I think it is important because it kind of speaks to some of the structural kind of issues with this report, is that the governance section, when I reviewed it, my takeaway was that some of the governance challenges, which were well documented and acknowledged, were kind of taken as a given, especially since there were no strategies from this governance section highlighted. And one of the things we just heard in the golden mussel presentation was that the challenges with adapting to this type of invasive species are governance related. That the coordination across the different agencies and actors that need to happen are really slow and cumbersome. And this is a well-known and well-documented in the social science literature and well documented here in the Delta, that the governance of the system is part of the needed solution. So I really think that elevating some of those points that came up and were nicely highlighted in the governance chapter to strategies would be valuable for recognizing just what's going to have to happen in order to implement this type of strategy overall. So that's it.
Thank you, Tanya. Bob.
Great, thanks, Inga. I guess I'd like to be very supportive of what Obey and the others have had to say so far. It was an interesting document to read, and I guess I read it twice. I thought it was very well edited, and it's a very glossy, sharp document. But I also think they missed the mark on this one. Everyone seems to be jumping on, as they should, on the bandwagon of climate change. And yet, when you look forward in the Delta and elsewhere, land use change and cultural change are going to be as important, or perhaps even more important, than climate change going forward. And as Obey mentioned, the interactions between climate and land use change and cultural change are not really examined very deeply in this document. They make allusions to it, but it is so important that I think you can put out a document like this, and hopefully people will embrace it, I guess. But it just seems like it just misses the mark of what's needed going forward, especially if you're going to have viable responses to the changes that are coming down the road at us. So that's kind of my overarching comment. Specifically, another overarching comment would have to do with the ecosystem strategies. I was very disappointed in those. If you actually look at them, the first 3 ecosystem strategies, 2 or 3, are about people. And people are part of the ecosystems, but the authors really don't address ecosystem processes very well. They make allusions to biodiversity and some other things, but for example, I don't think soils are ever mentioned as part of an ecosystem property and what they're going to do about, maintaining the vitality of soils, resilience within ecosystems and so forth. It seems like there were so many topics that are of vital importance going forward that are ecosystem topics, and yet they really don't address them. Well, this is probably a peeve of mine, but they talk about establishing regional parks to preserve biodiversity, and well, I really wonder if regional parks are a viable strategy for preserving biodiversity, and they never do define what a regional park is and how it would be used and so forth. Anyway, it just left me with all sorts of questions in my mind, and feeling very disappointed in what they had to offer in terms of details. Even though I'm very supportive of the activity of being forward-looking and trying to figure out how we as a society will adapt to an uncertain future. So anyway, that's my comments. That's all I'll say. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Bob. Of course, it was a very big effort to put all this together too.
Mhm.
But thank you for your overarching comments. Virginia.
I was impressed by this report. It had many good things. I also agree with all the comments that were raised earlier. Picking up on the land use change mentioned by Bob, throughout the United States, land use change is the biggest cause for loss of habitat. And so it really needs to be focused on. And along with that, I felt like the report was pretty conservative in new practices and new crops they talked about. They endorse rice, they endorse tree crops, but I think there are other crops that we could be looking at and other land use practices that should be considered. And then that leads me to, there's very little discussion about incentives for some of these different actions. And there are many places throughout the report where it'd be useful to talk about that. We're constantly hearing about the funding challenge, but if there are incentives for making things better, those I think should be discussed. I was really glad to see the glossary there. That is very helpful. However, a few of the key terms are missing, like restoration and what restore means. What are we restoring to? In one place, it talks about enhancing the Delta ecosystem. What does that mean? We need to think about, what kind of system we're looking at in the future. And then resilience is not defined either. And it, of course, means different things in different places. But I think some more attention to how terms are used would be very useful. But the report is good, and I think all of these comments that the committee has put together are very helpful as well.
Thanks very much, Virginia. I have comment too. I agree with everybody, almost everybody, that that the report is quite an amazing piece of work. It is not an easy task to look at all these different aspects of climate change and how they can be mitigated or how we can adapt. One major comment I had was that the topic of water quality is dealt with in a very superficial way. There are references to water quality objectives and water quality standards, also not defined, these terms, they should be defined. And yeah, that was rather disappointing. First of all, define them in a broader sense. I mean, if you recommend ecosystem restoration, you need the habitat first, but then you also need a good quality environment, meaning good quality water. So I think that was really not dealt with in a thorough way. The other more minor thing is I noticed that the urban adaptation in the urban environment was mainly, the main recommendation was, well, plant more trees and create more parks and stuff like that. I think there's more that can be done, including for water quality or for improving water quality. So those are my main overarching topics that I think need to be addressed in more depth. Anybody else? Would anybody else like to chime in?
Yeah, couple of other things I wanted to mention. I think, I think it's nice that every strategy had some sort of an equity consideration. I think that was kind of nice. And, spatially in particular. But the other area, I assume there will be codependencies. I think in the executive summary, they had some nice criteria how to select these strategies, like low hanging fruits to, opportunities that may come about later on. But later in the chapters or in the report, I didn't see how that was used to pick these strategies. So any kind of codependencies, although there was some co-benefits in many places, but sequencing would be nice and address how they might have to change over time because of climate change in the future. And one last point is that this 2021 report of vulnerability assessment, in this region, 5 years is a long time. So maybe the modeling that was done for that study, I'm not sure if that's obsolete. It would have been nice for them to summarize, perhaps quantitatively, how different, sectors might be affected due to climate change in the future. I mean, I tried to go back to that other report, but it would have been nice to summarize that. Anyway, but I agree with everybody. I think it's a lot of work and very nicely put together report, but there are some places where they could improve. I think that we will try to highlight as our comments.
Yeah, Virginia.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was the report talks about climate change, but it never really talks about what it means in terms of climate change. And so I assume it means temperature and precipitation. But sea level rise and especially changes in disturbance regimes are going to be big factors. And I didn't see much discussion of that.
Right. particularly, in the tributary watersheds, if we have forest fires and the changes in hydrology, that might be an issue in the future. And in the flood protection chapter that I reviewed, they didn't talk much about possibly increasing storage capacity, which might not be feasible, but in the future, without that additional storage, it might be hard to manage some of the floods because of the snow, right? Rain, proportions that will change in the future. So anyway, that's some of the comments I made.
So, oh,
Bob
Bob.
had.
I just have a question for the group. In one of the chapters I read, it seemed as though the report was providing support for the tunnel project, for the conveyance efficiently of water through the Delta to the south. And I don't know if others got the same impression or not, but if they did, how do we feel as ISB members about a report like this being supportive of the tunnel project when it hasn't been approved yet? I don't know. Anyway, I'm just kind of throwing that out. It at least in my reading, I was very surprised by it.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Do you remember where that was in the report? I guess I might have missed that.
Yeah.
It must have been in one of the hydrology chapters.
Right. I saw that too, but although it didn't specifically say it's a tunnel project, I think it's some sort of a conveyance through Delta, I think was what it was mentioned. But I realized it was the tunnel project. But I don't know if we have much we can say.
Well, I think you cannot just ignore it, right? I mean, it is also a measure to adapt to, for example, sea level rise. So I see why they would put it in. Lauren, you had something to say there.
Yeah, just on this question that Bob raised, and I do not have the language in front of me. I could look it up. But a while back, the Delta Stewardship Council spent a lot of time very carefully thinking about how they were going to talk about storage and conveyance in the Delta plan. And so they did come up with language that they all agreed upon, which was, in my recollection, it was not specific to the tunnels. It doesn't mention the tunnels as a preferred thing, a preferred approach. But I can try to find that language. My guess is, and I'd have to go see how Delta Adapts talks about it, that they were just using or pointing to that language in the Delta plan, because both documents are from the Delta Stewardship Council. So that's my guess. But just to point out, I'm almost 100% certain it's not saying we support the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And Inga, we do have planning. We do have
Exactly.
yeah, we have planning staff on the call as well. So I can turn it over to them to help provide better clarity on that question, if that's okay.
Yes.
We have Annika Ragsdale. Annika, you should be able to unmute your microphone. Feel free to briefly introduce yourself before providing your feedback.
Okay, great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Hi, my name is Annika Ragsdale. I'm on our climate change and environmental justice team at the council. And yeah, first of all, I just wanted to thank you all for your feedback on the report. We'll be reviewing your comments, of course, with the rest of the team, and then getting back to you with more detailed feedback. But just to answer some of the questions that have just come up, yes, basically what Lauren said is correct, that the language that's in the plan is just referencing what's already said in the Delta plan. And I think in addition to some of your other comments requesting more detail about, like, what is climate change? What does that mean for the Delta? And some of the additional requests around like the ecosystem strategies detail. that exists in the Delta plan and in the vulnerability assessment that was done in phase 1 of the project. So I think we can do more to kind of link back to those other documents and make that a little clearer. So appreciate you calling that out. And then a couple other notes to the point about prioritizing strategies. We did at one point have a prioritization for the strategies, but that was removed in an internal review. So we can think about that some more and if we would want to bring that back in. And I also wanted to acknowledge the earlier point that someone made about how not everything that's in the strategies is within our control. And we definitely acknowledge and appreciate that. And that's why we have identified leads and partners for each of the strategies who we're hoping to work with on implementation. So, so I'll just touch on a couple of those points you brought up. But yeah, again, appreciate the feedback and happy to share more detailed responses later as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Annika. Does anybody have questions for Annika or comments on what was just said? No, don't see any.
I do. I was trying to get my hand up.
Okay.
Morgan Chow, I want to see if I can share screen, just shared something with me through Zoom. She's recovering from a cold. She works with Annika, who just spoke. But she just shared with me the connection to the Delta plan. It's Delta Plan Recommendation WRR12A. And let me see if I can do the shared screen thing. Here, share.
While you're figuring that out, Lauren, I just want to comment that it was obvious that there had been analyses and things. I think for me, I'm just looking for citations back to those analyses. Yeah, it was clear that they weren't just pulling this stuff together casually.
Can you all see that? I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Delta Plan Recommendation WRR12A. So that's part of the Delta Plan. And that's the approach the Delta Stewardship Council has taken for a number of years after they did a modification to the Delta Plan with much public comment. I was around for that time period. So yeah. That's what that is. Very carefully worded.
So I have a question for Annika, maybe, or maybe Lauren. So is my understanding correct that the Delta Plan did not address climate change, but this report does address climate change? Delta Plan is a bunch of strategies for the present condition without considering climate change? Or am I incorrect in there? Because I didn't read the Delta Plan.
I'm going to let Annika take that one.
Yes, yeah. So the short answer is yes. Okay, that this is the plan that addresses, well, the Delta Adapts initiative, both phases address climate change and the strategies for addressing it in the Delta.
Okay. So I think it's in the executive summary, if I remember correctly, what I just said.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Are there, Obi, this is more.
Yeah, so I think, so I don't have a lot of time to prepare the letter by February 12th. So my question is, I assume you're going to write a letter, and I welcome anybody else who wants to help. Maybe a few pages of high-level observations, and then provide some sort of maybe a little bit cleaned up version of our many comments. I think there are a very nice set of comments in there for every chapter. According to those 3 categories you mentioned. Does that plan sound reasonable? We write a letter and then attach our comments. If I try to summarize all the comments, that's going to be a very challenging task. But pick the high levels ones from the comments and also what I heard today. It would be our sort of a response letter, then attach this as an appendix. Does everybody agree with that? Or Kenny has and Virginia.
Hands up. Yeah, Virginia, I think.
Obie, I think the cover letter is very short, and I don't think you have to spend much time cleaning this up. I think it's more important to spend our effort on new work. People have spent a lot of time on this already, and the advice is not gonna change much, I think, by particularly cleaning up the details. And I just think that we should send it off pretty much as is and not spend too much more time on it, because we want to spend time on the next version probably.
Sounds good to me.
Kenny, you wanted to
Well,
say?
now that Virginia said that, I was gonna suggest that we maybe not go as far as saying it's ready to go or 90% of the way there, but maybe within each chapter, just take the ones they are and group them major and, minor. So otherwise it's kind of hard for a reader to know that this is an important comment. And I did some ones that are second order, and right now they all look equal. So it's really just cut and pasting them. And we do that a lot, right? Major comments and then other comments or something within each chapter.
Yeah.
Just to kind of guide the reader a little bit.
Right. Kenny, we have 3 categories in there now. You're saying make them 2 categories. Right now we have what is good and what's missing and what could be improved, but you're suggesting.
Yeah, so for example, with what's good, you can just leave them as a list because everybody's happy.
Okay.
Good. It's the ones where what's not so good could be just grouped into major and I don't know if you want to call it minor or other, some way to prioritize, because some of them are pretty far reaching and some of them are not. And right now if I'm reading it, I'm having a little trouble figuring out which ones are kind of really important. So and I don't think that's a lot of extra work. You can just read it and I'm volunteering you, but someone can just read it and just group them, right? Within the ones that are not the positive ones, but I don't know what you called it, what could be improved.
Okay, so are you volunteering to assist, Kenny?
Yeah, I don't, as long as we're not, as Virginia said and others, we're not trying to digest them.
No, I think that's what Obi said earlier, right? He's not going to do that. He's just going to pull out the major ones and summarize and then leave the rest.
No, I understood Obi was going to do that overarching ones that go across chapters.
Oh.
I was in the summary letter, the high level overarching ones I was thinking of writing and then leaving all the comments as they are, but I'm hearing something different now, I think.
And my suggestion is within each chapter's comments, bin them into 2 categories.
Okay, and then not write another letter, just like Virginia said.
It kind of gets you away from, as Virginia said, a long letter or anything in the beginning because you've done it for them. So
okay, let's hear what Lisa has to say on this. Lisa?
Yeah, I think these are all helpful comments. I guess I would, to Virginia's point, I completely agree with Virginia that, this report's not going to change a lot. It has been through a lot of iterations and a lot of input. But what I heard when I first raised these concerns was that comments we make now could influence the process used for the next one. So I would try to focus an overarching letter. I do still think it's worth having a sort of big picture letter and with looking at that lens of if you were going to do this again, what might you do differently? And I think in particular, we can focus on, some of the early comments that Obi made.
Okay, so let's hear if there are any public comments on this first. Edmund?
Yeah, there is one.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have one public comment from Mike Avina. Mike, you have the ability to unmute your microphone and feel free to introduce yourself to the board before providing your comment, but this is optional. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Mike Avinia here with Silurium Reserve. We represent LAND, which is a coalition of local agencies of the North Delta reclamation districts and other agencies representing approximately or encompassing approximately 75,000 acres in the North Delta. And we have a general comment about strategy WSR 5 and implementing action WSR 5-9. Of course, to paraphrase, strategy WSR 5 says that we will review and consider modifying water quality objectives. And then the implementing action relates to ensuring that modeling and up to the minute science is incorporated into how that strategy is implemented. Our question and our comment is generally about whether or not those models accurately account for bathymetry. Just to set the table, obviously bathymetry affects water quality to the extent that things like the deep water ship channel and other deep channels to some extent influence and draw in salinity intrusion. And then those channels, some of those channels are undergoing accretion, both in the North Delta, channels that are used for deep shipping, and in the South Delta, there's accretion, there's ongoing dredging. And then this consideration about how bathymetry and channel depth affects salinity intrusion as it relates to sea level rise and climate change is then dynamic insofar as sea level rise raises the effective depth of the water elevation and interacts with the necessary dredging and the effective bathymetry in a dynamic way. And so all of these variables we feel like are things that should be accounted for with regard to modeling for water quality objectives and sea level rise and salinity intrusion. We want to know if those are accounted for in the existing models, and if they're not, we encourage you to think about them.
It sounds like this is more a question for Annika. Annika, would you want to say something to this?
Sure. This is not my area of expertise, so I think I would actually have to reach out to our water supply technical lead to get the answer to that question. But Mike, I believe I have your contact information, so I can also follow up with you directly.
Mike, I do have a question. There's a DSM model, right, for water quality. So are you saying that doesn't have the level of detail vertically, maybe, to account for bathymetry variation? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're aware of DSM. We're not water quality modeling experts. We're just raising the question, does DSM or other models account for bathymetry, account for accretion, account for dredging, and account for the dynamic interaction of sea level rise with effective bathymetry as it all relates to the ultimate issue of saltwater intrusion and water quality.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to Annika. So Annika, you're going to try to answer the question?
Yes, I can
Reach
get
out
an
to
answer
someone.
to this
Okay,
question.
great.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah. So unless there are more clarifying questions, comments, what we really would like to do is vote on whether OB, and with Kenny's approval, I'll put you on the list too, Kenny. OB and Kenny finalize the letter. Members of the DISB would still have an opportunity to review before it is submitted to council. But in order to do this, we have to vote today because the next meeting is after the deadline. So do you feel like we're ready to vote on this?
Do we need a final summary of what Obey perceives as his marching orders?
Yeah, we could. Yeah, Obi, do you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I think what we agreed upon, what I think you will vote to agree to this process that we are going to go through between now and February 18th or 12th, right? So my understanding is that I will prepare a draft letter and the document by February 12th, or before that, I will share that with Kenny, through Edmund and others. And then we will have it ready on the 12th for the ISB to look at it. And then by 18th, hopefully we can finalize it. That's my understanding. That's the process that you're going to vote for, right?
Okay, Kenny has his hand raised. Kenny?
Yeah, I'm looking at it again, and it's probably not. The way it's phrased with the 3 categories now about what could be improved, what could be done, right? I think that's probably, it's not the way I would organize each chapter's comments, but it's okay. It's, so I'm not sure it's not hard to rearrange it into minor and major, right? You just take those 3 categories out and you cross-reference the other ones, right? But I don't know if people like the way this reads, then what? I'm not sure my suggestion is worth disrupting the whole organization of it.
Mm-hmm.
If
But in that case, we can leave it as it is and write the overarching sort of letter that I think Lisa suggested.
so maybe I'll help. Maybe if again, I'm not sure what we're voting on, but I can help Obi with the first model he proposed. Leave the individual comments the way they're listed. They occur sequentially in the chat.
Yes.
And work on an overarching issues statement that would kind of serve the same purpose. But
Right.
looking back, I'm not sure it's worth disrupting the whole organization, given we're going to see this again, as I think and Virginia pointed out. They're clear, our comments. So I'm okay either way. But if there's a path of least resistance or less resistance, that seems preferable given the schedule. And people have looked at the current organization and no one else had problems with it. So maybe I'll just maybe the idea is to work with Obi on extracting from that the 5 or 6 bullet points that are, go across the comments. What do you think, Obi?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. We got some verbal input today.
Yeah.
Maybe I can try to write a first draft and share it.
Yep.
And then
I can look
and then leave the comments. There will be less work than what we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
So, and it's more doable by the 5th, I think. 5th, it's not too far away. It's like next week.
No, it's not. So
yeah. Okay.
So that would
all right.
That would be my suggestion.
Lisa wanted to say something. Lisa?
Just one more addition, and I hope this isn't too controversial, but yeah, I like this plan. I think the letter can help us highlight what we think are the really big picture issues. I would encourage people, if you heard anything today that changed your thinking a little bit, like another way to highlight the more important comments is to actually delete the sort of lesser comments. So if folks feel like maybe some of the lesser comments aren't so relevant anymore, if you learned anything, or maybe not so important to include, feel free to propose, removing stuff too.
And one way to do that is for Edmund to share those comments. I think he has already done that. Mm-hmm. Just, scratch those and send it back to him, maybe. I don't know. If one option.
Yeah, I'm not sure
what the process would be.
Get the individual comments to be scratched, right? So
yeah, I'm saying if you recognize your comment and maybe you don't feel as strongly about it
Okay.
anymore, you take your own comment out. Yeah.
I mean, it could be done after the 5th, then you review the letter, I guess.
yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay, we got a plan. So I saw some tentative nodding when I asked if we are ready to vote. A suggested motion would be to have Obi and Kenny finalize the review letter based on the discussion today. Would anybody like to make that motion?
I move that Obi and Kenny revise the letter based on our discussion today and that we approve that letter and process.
Thank you, Tanya. Any seconds?
I second.
Thank you. Great. So in that case, we can take a vote. Virginia,
Yes.
Tanya,
Yes,
Diane,
Yes.
Anna?
I abstain since I was out for much of the discussion.
Okay, that's fine. Bob,
Yes.
Obi,
Yes.
Kenny?
Yes.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yes.
And I say yes as well, so the motion has passed. Thank you all for that discussion. So that's great. So we can move to agenda item 5, and we're a little bit ahead of the time. So the planned time. So the next agenda item is the planning of the Climate Science Research Symposium. And I'll just give a brief background. Delta ISB plans to organize and host a public symposium in May 2025 on the current state of climate science in the Bay Delta region. A subsequent symposium will focus on understanding how organizations in the region are considering climate change. The draft prospectus was circulated for public comments, which closed, so the deadline closed in November 19th, and the prospectus has now been finalized. And I'd like to turn over to Obi to give us an overview of the final prospectus.
Right. Okay, thanks. So actually, it's I work with Anna and staff on this. I feel like we have, and Anna can chime in after I finish if you have anything you want to add. I feel like we addressed, all the comments that we had at the last meeting. I think, to highlight some of the comments, I think there was a suggestion to, well, let me step back a little bit. So we have 2 symposia, I think. We originally started it as one workshop, but I think, so the first one is on the climate science, workshop, and the second one is how the climate projections are being used. And I think we have quite a number of comments, very useful comments from agencies and individuals. I think many of them like this idea of having to highlight the importance. We know the climate science is evolving quite rapidly. We just want to make sure that the board understand what is the latest science on this and how they are being used. And all the comments that we received, as you see on the screen here, even the agencies, I think they like this idea of having it. And many of them suggested preferences and potential speakers, which were very useful. So one of the things that we want to do after today, I think Lauren and her staff will help us coordinate a few calls to some key products that are out there. And it's not like this topic is totally new. I think to the credit to the agencies, they have done a lot of work on this already, and we don't want to duplicate efforts. And we want to learn from what has been done to date. I think our idea was to have a discussion with 5th climate assessment for California folks, and then those who put together Delta Adapt, and also DWR. I think those are the 3, and Lauren can mention if I miss anyone. I think the idea is we will have a conversation with them, and I might even want to have a conversation with some others who made some comments to kind of make sure we get all the input we can. The other aspect is there are a lot of reports that are out there that I think is good for us to review. I think Bob and some others recommended that we provide a summary ideally using to make things easier, using AI tools. I think we followed that suggestion, and the staff is helping us do that. I think Anna suggested some new tool that might be out there. So the idea we have is use all these relevant documents, and we have some important questions in this prospectus, and we are going to get a first draft of answers to that, basically as a summary of these reports. And then we will review them and make sure they make sense. That will make our life easier, not go through maybe hundreds of pages of these reports but we'll make sure that we have highlights of those reports incorporated into a briefing report that we are going to produce for the board to review. So if you can go to the schedule now. So based on our timing, so we have a new schedule. Basically, January, we will finalize the prospectus today. I feel like we are ready to finalize that today. And then February, we will have some scoping discussions with those agencies and others for ongoing efforts. And March, we will finalize the briefing paper. Then April, we'll finalize the agenda for the first symposium and open registration. So we are suggesting, and this is something we need to make sure these dates work, either May 14th or 15th is when we will have the first symposium. One of those days. Those are in-person dates for the ISB meetings. So maybe we'll use one of them for the symposium. And then prepare and release a summary memo by July. And then we start planning for second symposium and so on. I don't know, Anna, if you have anything you want to add.
Sure. So one of the things that has that we've been working on since the last time we met as a group is there's a variety of these new tools that allow you to delve more deeply into existing documents. And there's one that I'm familiar with called Notebook LM, which is a tool that's put together by Google. And what it allows you to do is you can essentially upload any number of documents or links to websites or whatever it may be, and then ask questions based on those documents. And so unlike these completely free sort of these open AI chatbots that pull information from anywhere on the web, and in some cases suffer from hallucinations, or it's not clear where the information is coming from, this Notebook LM format is one where in the answers that you get, there's essentially citations to specific passages in the documents that you uploaded. And so it's very transparent where the information is coming from. And I've used these now a couple of times, and I've been really, really impressed at how well it does. And so I created one just to play around in with, on the order of half a dozen different reports that already are in existence. And then I started asking questions that were essentially very similar to the questions that we're asking in the prospectus, and the summaries as answers to those questions based on the documents that already exist were actually quite impressive. And so I think, to me, there was two takeaways from that. One is creating a briefing document for people to read through prior to the workshop, I think is going to be much less of a heavy lift than we had anticipated potentially the last time we spoke as a group. But second, even for the questions that we asked that we intend to address as part of the workshop, you can get much further in answering those questions based on mining existing reports and papers than I had anticipated. And so to me, what that means is that there's an opportunity here to essentially get a first take on each of these questions
gleaned from existing reports in a way that is very, very efficient. And then both in selecting which speakers to invite and in providing guidance to these speakers, make it clear to them what the baseline is in terms of what we have already been able to glean from existing reports, so that they can focus really on things that are either, their very informed professional opinion, or things that are so on the bleeding edge that they may not be in published literature yet, or they may not have been taken into account in these reports. But essentially ensuring so that we don't end up spending a large chunk of the workshop having speakers educate us on things that are already documented in existing literature. And I think this allows us to be much more tactical in terms of inviting the right speakers, but also giving them more specific guidance on what it is that we want to hear from them.
And one thing I wanted to mention also, we do have a compilation of potential speakers. I think we have a spreadsheet that had the speaker list. So we'll have to kind of start contacting our potential speakers, make sure the dates are acceptable to them if we have the May date for the first symposium.
Virginia, you're raising your hand.
I'm raising my little hand. I couldn't find the button. Well, Obey, that is really good, because the only thing I was going to say about the schedule is that the speakers need to be contacted as soon as possible. I think the
Right.
speakers we want are going to be busy people.
Right.
Yeah. I also noticed that the recent letter from Water Research wasn't in your list of comment letters, suggestions. So just make sure that's in there.
I have a compilation of those comments. I added that to, and maybe those two names that Deirdre suggested, we will add that to the spreadsheet of people that we might contact.
Okay.
Another question that came up is, do we want to, sort of where on the spectrum of fully in person to fully virtual do we want to be? I think the baseline assumption is it will be hybrid to some extent, but for the speakers, do we definitely want them all to be there in person? If so, then for speakers who are coming in from outside of California, they would probably, need to block out more time, may need to know further in advance. I think, I don't know, this may not be a popular opinion, but, when we have these hybrid workshops, often the virtual attendance is larger than the in-person attendance. And if we were to be bringing speakers in, let's say from the East Coast, and then the in the room attendance is quite thin and the virtual attendance is quite large, then I don't know if that's optimizing everyone's effort. And so just broadly, I'm curious to hear what people think about where we should be on the fully in person to fully virtual spectrum, both in terms of the participants and in terms of the speakers.
Oh, I raised my hand because I have an opinion on that. I think hybrid for both would improve your chances of getting the speakers you want and at the date you want. I think it makes things so much easier for people to participate or contribute. So that's just my thing.
So maybe can I respond super quickly, and then Diane, we can move on to you. So that's my initial gut instinct as well. My concern there is, what if we end up in a room with, a third of the speakers and a dozen participants and everybody else is virtual?
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that sends the right message to the people who actually came in. And so I think there's a threshold beyond which hybrid gets awkward rather than beneficial, because there's so few people actually participating in the physical location of the workshop. And there's a couple workshops we've had where I feel like we were on the cusp of that. And if we also are going to allow speakers to be hybrid, then I worry we'll go very far in that direction. And then, and this is where I think it's probably, I'm not sure if this would be a popular opinion, but then we might as well consider just having a virtual workshop as an alternative. But I know that Obey feels differently about this. And so I thought this would be a good place to have that discussion.
All right. Well, Diane, what do you think?
So I participated in both of our previous workshops, and there was some of the feedback was how valuable it was for people to be there in person and have these in-person interactions. And there were a lot of side conversations going on, and that helped us with moving ahead with the reports. I'd be interested to hear Bob's comments, but the in-person aspect was critical, and we felt like we'd already accomplished something at the end of this in-person workshop that contributed to moving the science forward. And so I'd be concerned with going all virtual for certain.
All right, Obi?
Yeah, I think I'm with Diane on this too. And like Anna said, I feel like it's very beneficial to have an in-person workshop. We do understand some people cannot make it. My feeling is that if we somehow can get many of the speakers, hopefully they are not, many of them might be local, or at least within the state. But more importantly, I feel like many of the agency folks who have shown interest in this through comment letters, they will show up in person. That's my feeling. Having both those speakers and the agency personnel who are very interested in these topics and have some experience to share, that will be very useful, like Dan was saying. That's my feeling. So we should try to promote to the extent possible an in-person workshop, but encourage the agency personnel, within the Bay Delta region to attend in person. And I have a feeling they will.
Tanya?
Yeah, I was gonna echo what Diane and Obey just said. I think the last workshops we had worked well with the in-person emphasis. I think we had a couple exceptions where, due to last minute scheduling challenges, we allowed some people to Zoom in, and that was fine. Of course, if it gets to the point where we're having a really difficult time getting the panelists to come in person, and maybe moving it into an online format is the backup. But I would start with the more in-person option if we can.
Yeah, I agree with Diane, actually, that I was at those workshops too, and it was fantastic, the interactions in the breaks, during the breaks and after the workshop. Yeah. Bob?
I agree that we should put a very strong emphasis on in-person workshops. Let me float the idea. I don't know if this has been done before, but I wonder if you could say restrict the number of virtual attendees to, let's say, 20 to 25% of the participants. Give the option if people need to sign up, or attend virtually, that you cap the number of virtual attendees and really try to, put an emphasis on people attending in person. Because those informal discussions, as you all know, those informal discussions that we do have kind of off camera are incredibly valuable, I think, in the long term. So anyway, I just throw that out as an idea. It may or may not be feasible. So thanks.
Yeah, sounds like you got the input you were asking for, Anna and Obi.
Although in this case, I think that we can make it hybrid for participants, but we really should try to get all the speakers in person, because otherwise it starts to fray a little bit.
And I
Because
mean,
if we
aren't
make it,
the,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, aren't the speakers going to be from this area or from California mostly because we have such an emphasis on this area? You know?
I
Yeah,
think
for
many of
most
them
part.
will be, but not necessarily exclusively.
Yeah.
Yeah, for most part, I would think.
Yeah. I think if somebody is really from the East Coast and they're having, you know, I mean, they have to spend so much time on the trip to participate. I mean, that could be an exemption, you know. Virginia.
I just think you need to be flexible because if you have some speaker you really want who's from California but happens to be in the East Coast during the meeting time, you still want to have that speaker. And I'm not in favor of having a limit on the number of hybrid participants because having a lot of hybrid participants as well as in-room participants just speaks to there being a lot of interest in this topic and people being able to join it. So I like the hybrid model. I think everybody who goes to a hybrid meeting and knows there's an in-person meeting realizes they would get more if they were there, but time is limited and you have to make choices.
Thank you. Any more comments from the board? Diane.
Just to follow up, it is possible, as for example, if there's breakout groups, to have a breakout group be a hybrid, be the Zoom people, if you will. But if you're having breakout groups, it can be really difficult to have a mixture of people in person and a hybrid, one or two hybrid people. It's my experience, it gets awkward.
That's doable, I think. I've seen that happen. Yeah. So Inga, are we approving the prospectus today?
No.
No, we're not.
today.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
It's not the plan, but we could if you wanted to vote. Has everybody had a chance to read the prospectus?
I thought maybe Edmund can, I thought last time we had already voted that we were accepting it pending these last edits that Obey and I were making. So I don't know if we need to vote again. Maybe
Edmund, could you help us out there?
Yeah, at the last meeting, we voted to make the oral edits today, so that we just need to revote if there's like a major change that people disagreed with. Or something that was missing, but pretty much the prospectus will be finalized and then the leads are working on planning.
Okay, so we already voted on that. So.
Yeah.
All right, it's final.
Yeah. We just have to decide about that hybrid versus in person, but yeah, I agree. I mean, in person is preferable, but in terms of the audience, I am totally with Diane that you want as many people, you want to provide access for as many people as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to thank particularly those from agencies who commented and provide valuable input. I think, I think those are very helpful. We want to thank them for providing, good input on the prospectus.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this topic?
There are none.
No public comments. So great. So thank you so much for those efforts. I'm starting to really look forward to the workshop. Next agenda item is a brief discussion, just asking for your thoughts on the upcoming or this year's Delta ISB member reappointments and recruitments, mainly recruitments. I just want to briefly go over the background again. There are 5 Delta ISB members who will complete their first term on August 31st of this year and can be reappointed for a second term. Lisa Wanger, Diane McKnight, Tanya Heikela, Virginia Dale and Bob Naiman. Per the Delta Reform Act, the council is responsible for appointing Delta ISB members, and as part of the process, the council asks the Delta lead scientist to provide a recommendation on who to appoint. Several ISB members decided not to serve for a second term, so we already heard that Dr. Holzer has resigned effective immediately, and Dr. Dale decided not to serve a second term. Since the last meeting, Dr. Naiman has indicated that he will not pursue a second term. So given the third vacancy, I just would like to use a few minutes of this meeting to hear from the members about what expertise they think is needed on the board. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any further thoughts? Obi.
Yeah, I think, one thing I may have mentioned that in the last meeting, we need to replace the skill set that Tom had. He was the geologist and he had a lot of experience in earthquakes and subsidence. I think we would like to have a person who had that skill set replaced. On the other suggestion is, I don't know if we need another water resources person on the board or not. This is the area that I'm familiar with. But then those are my suggestions. But my other question is, and this is a rule question, are people who served some time back, are they eligible to be reappointed in any way? Probably answer is no.
Question for Edmund.
Yeah, someone
Yeah.
like Jay Lunn, for example.
Yeah, so if they serve 2 terms, they can't serve any more terms. But if you serve 1 term and you're never appointed for a second term, you could get reappointed. So for example, Tom Holzer started a second term, so he can't return to the board.
Okay.
But cases of ISB members who only serve 1 term, they can come back for a second 5-year term down the line.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Obi. Any other thoughts on this topic? Diane? Diane, where did you go?
I echo what Obe just said about bringing on some more geologic expertise to replace that expertise that was so important that Tom provided. Again, there could be something quite dramatic that happens, given all the subsidence and potential earthquakes and the Delta conveyance and project. There's a lot of uncertainty in the future. So having that we may be asked to respond to in some way, and having that expertise on the board, I think would be helpful.
Thank you, Diane. I would like to say also, I was thinking we definitely need ecology represented, but I would really, we have such an ecologically stressed system that there's a term called stress ecology. So that refers to all kinds of anthropogenic stressors. I would like to see that represented.
I also forgot to mention, now that Bob Naiman is leaving, too bad, Bob. His expertise is very valuable. I think the experience he had on ecology and others, so it'd be good to find somebody to replace him as well.
Yeah. So we're just collecting thoughts, and I don't see any more raised hands. We can conclude that. Lisa Marie is here, so she hears what you're saying. Can include that in her thinking.
I do have a question. I mean, there's a lot of comments on socio-economic, social science aspect. I assume that's something Tanya and Lisa can cover, or do we need to think about that? I'm just asking.
You know, some people have mentioned a need for people with more expertise in, say, tribal conditions and things like that. So I don't have a strong feeling, you know, because I'm wondering, do we need someone to review it who has the deep knowledge, or can all of us really just assess adequacy? It's an open question.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of duplication on this board. Diane has her hand raised.
And
Well,
Tanya too.
I was going to echo also what Obe said about maintaining strength in ecosystem science and all that you have provided, Tom. I think that would be very helpful, and there could be someone who's also has experience working with tribal connections from somewhere else, you know, not necessarily in the Delta, but elsewhere in the country, who would bring both perspectives to this that we might consider.
Tanya?
Yeah, Diane's always one step ahead of me today. I was just gonna say, for both Bob's replacement and also Virginia's replacement, it seems like we might want to look broadly to see if there are some ecologists who have some understanding of traditional ecological knowledge in their kind of wheelhouse of expertise. It seems like that could address some of those questions also that Lisa raised about, you know, do we have somebody on the board who can speak to some of the tribal expertise in the region, or at least how that type of knowledge can be incorporated with more Western forms of science. So might be worth exploring that.
Thank you. All right, I don't see any more hands. So we can conclude this discussion. Just asking are there any public comments on this, Edmund?
Yes, we have a public comment from Deirdre Desjardins. Deirdre, you have the ability to unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the thoughtful discussion, and I'll certainly miss Bob Nyman. It's been just wonderful. I did want to say I do really think that having somebody who has local expertise is important. A lot of local experience. Jay Lund's knowledge of the Delta, it was just unsurpassed. I mean, I came in and I have a research background and I pick things up rapidly, and I spent years just learning the complexity of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project and how they operate, and the watersheds, and you know, the pumps and the hydrology. Yeah, and Tom Holzer is also, you know, really important, not just for geology, but for specific geologic knowledge of the Delta. It's a, you know, fairly unique kind of place with the levees and so on. And that's going to be more important as time goes forward and people look at, you know, how to make climate adaptation investments in the Delta. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Yes, I would like to echo the sentiment. We will, of course, miss you dearly, Virginia and Bob, and I'm glad we still have you until the end of the summer. So, all right, well, let's conclude this discussion then. All right, are there Edmund, are there any public comments for matters that are not on the agenda?
I just want to double check, Deirdre, is this an old hand or do you have a public comment not on the agenda?
It's a new item.
Oh.
So I just wanted to say, so my background is in complex systems theory. I was at the Santa Fe Institute when the field was being founded. And we really are at a tipping point for governance in the United States, I think. And some of it, I think, is being driven by, there was a fundamental shift in how information propagated in our society with social media, and it's becoming much more, it's going through these tribal networks, and it isn't tethered to expertise. And you can see things kind of becoming divorced from, there's these societal narratives that are divorced from reality. And, we've seen the waves of firings of expert boards like APA, NSF, lost their expert boards. Everybody was dismissed. We're seeing, huge confusion and chaos being sowed about NSF and NIH grants. And it's part of, I think, this fundamental shift in there really was a distrust sown of science and scientists. And you can see amongst Republicans, distrust in scientists to do what's in the interests of the public went down starting in the pandemic pretty markedly. And so it's now like in the 35% or so. I don't remember the exact number for Republicans to actively distrust scientists. So it's kind of stunning to me because, I first got involved in advocating for scientists with the Delta Independent Science Board, and now we're seeing some of the same kind of forces just taking effect across the country and throughout the federal government. So I want to write some of it up, but I think it's just absolutely a tipping point. And I'm not sure how to address it, but I am working with Michael Mann and Peter Hotez. They have a book coming out, Science Under Siege, and that's becoming very timely. They've both been personally attacked and had their credibility attacked and been vilified in the media. Anthony Fauci had to have a security detail because of death threats against him. Peter Hotez didn't have Health and Human Services pay for security, but he does have a local security team. And I've also heard of death threats against NGOs associated with the LA fire. So it's a profound change in societal forces, and I'll try to write up some notes about this. But obviously, I think you're all aware, being scientists, of what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Deidre, for bringing that up. Definitely need science. All right, with that, we are almost at the end of the meeting. I just want to give a brief overview of what to expect. Oh, Diane, you have your hand raised.
But so I also wanted to thank Deidre for your comment, but also connect with the value of the Delta Independent Science Board having meetings in the Delta, being present there, which we've done, and the field trips, and really being connected. And our last in-person meeting was an opportunity where there were members of the public who came.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other responses to the comments? Nope, not at this time. But clearly, all the members of the board are taking science very seriously. And so anyway, going back to the overview of what to expect in February, we will have another virtual meeting. We will get a Delta lead scientist report. We'll get also a council/executive officer report. Discuss current reviews and hopefully be able to vote on the contaminant monitoring prospectus. That's it. And then we'll have an in-person meeting in March. So we look forward to seeing you in person then. Are there any more public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
No. Well, then I hand over to you for a review of items to follow up.
Yep. So during the welcome and declarations, Lisa Wanger and Obe provided new disclosures. So we'll keep track of that on our disclosures page. For today, the discussion, we got a presentation from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on the golden mussel response. There was interest in a follow-up presentation for speakers who could speak more on how to address things when the mussels have already arrived and already in place, and then interest in learning more from the State Lands Commission about ballast water. So we'll definitely follow up with CDFW to see if they have any other recommendations for speakers and schedule that down the line. And I think Lisa Wanger, you brought up an idea about if there is interest, maybe the board could provide suggestions on research. So maybe that's another follow-up item after we get more presentations on this agenda item. For Delta Adapts, today the board took action to have Obe and Kenny finish the memorandum based off the discussion today. So Obe and Kenny will draft some overarching comments, and then we're mainly going to be leaving the chapter comments as is, but with some slight cleanup. The current goal is to submit this by February 18th, and then we hope to get a draft memo for board members to review on February 12th, just for some individual comments. And then at that stage, if there is a individual comment you want to withdraw, feel free to let staff know to delete it in the final draft. Any questions for that agenda item in terms of follow-up item? All right. And then today, the board also had a discussion on Delta ISB member reappointment and recruitment. Lisa Marie, who was on the call, will be taking note of the discussion today, as well as the one from December, and helping draft up a recruitment flyer to fill the 3 vacancies on the board. And then in February, the goal is to have a contaminants prospectus for discussion. So just keep a lookout on your inbox for that meeting material. That's all I have for follow-up items, unless there's anything that anyone would like to add. And at this stage, we don't have any public comments on this item.
Thanks very much, Edmund. This time I wasn't going to forget to ask. Okay, no more public comments. In that case, I adjourn the meeting. It was very nice seeing you all. Have a good rest
Thank you.
of the day.